Aquí en Cartagena es un tema sensible. Te voy a hacer una pregunta que aquí ha generado polémica en diferentes momentos, y es que algunos sectores y algunas personas hemos cuestionado mucho cómo a través de algunos ritmos musicales de alguna manera se incentiva a la violencia contra la mujer, y hemos tenido una posición muy fuerte frente a lo que ocurre con un ritmo que se vive, que se siente, que es de aquí, de Cartagena, que se llama champeta. Y hemos visto cómo a través de la champeta, en algunas zonas de esta región, se ha mostrado el cuerpo de la mujer como un objeto. Bueno, no solamente la champeta, hay otros ritmos que también lo hacen, y respetamos mucho a los artistas que promueven la champeta y que promueven otros ritmos, pero consideramos que algunas canciones, no solamente de estos ritmos, sino de todas, o algunas expresiones artísticas musicales, han incentivado la violencia o el uso del cuerpo de la mujer para generar violencia. ¿Tú qué piensas de eso?
Well, I think it's certainly a universal problem. In the UK, we had a very similar outcry just last year, I think it was, about a song called Blurred Lines by Robin Thicke, which specifically talks about the blurred lines of whether a woman wants to have sex with you, and said things like, "I know you want it," was the repeated refrain of the song. And there was also some very violent lyrics about doing something to a woman in a way that sounded very violent. And it was argued that the suggestion was that the song made it sound like a woman wants it, whether she says so or not. It made it sound like it was suggested, it was kind of encouraging rape or myths around rape. And I think for me that the answer here is that this is about making our voices heard. It's about influencing and shaping culture through society and what we see as acceptable. What happened in the UK was that there was a huge outcry against the song, and in a lot of student unions in particular, they organised enormous debates about the songs, and they talked about it, and women explained why it made them feel this way, and they explained why it was problematic and the influence it might be having, and they made democratic decisions not to have the song played within their student union, for example. So I think that there is a very fine line here, because of course you start to encounter questions about censorship and about freedom of speech, but that actually there are ways of fighting against these things that don't necessarily have to mean banning it, you know? Don't necessarily have to mean saying it's not allowed, but actually saying, as a society, let's talk about this, and let's explain and loudly protest and loudly talk about why it matters to us, and perhaps hope to change culture that way, so that actually people who are making this music start to understand these concerns and perhaps take some of them on themselves. I think that this is a really interesting problem with feminist campaigning, actually, and we had a similar thing recently with a newspaper in the UK called The Sun, which prints a naked woman on page 3. It's our biggest selling family newspaper, and it has a topless woman every day on page 3. And there again, we came up against this dilemma where women and feminists were saying, this is really problematic. It doesn't belong in the newspaper. It's sending a message that the news about women is that they have breasts and that their bodies are there to be sexualized and objectified. It's sending a message to young people that this is how you should view women. It's dehumanizing women. But on the other hand, you have people saying, well, you know, but freedom of expression, and it's very important not to ban this. And the way that we got around it was that there was an amazing woman in the UK called Lucy Holmes who started a campaign called No More Page 3. But instead of going to the government, instead of asking for censorship or a ban, she asked people all over the country to stand up with her if they felt the same way. Anybody, men, women, girls, to talk about what impact Page 3 had had on them and why they felt that this was damaging. And they got stories from schoolgirls of men who'd read it next to them on the bus and looked down their tops and said, don't worry, I shouldn't think they'll ask you to pose with breasts like yours. They had stories of women in the workplace who'd had it left open on their desk as a way of harassing them and belittling them in the workplace. And 200,000 people stood up and said, I feel like this isn't the right thing. And they just appealed to the editor and said, would you consider changing this? Because of public opinion, because it was being so widely covered and so many people were speaking up about it. And last week they stopped printing this image in the newspaper. So I think for me, I think we have every right to talk about the cultural norms that help to perpetuate violence against women, or the ideas of objectification that perhaps are not particularly helpful. I think it's important that we say that this isn't about direct cause and effect. No one's suggesting that you hear a song or you see a picture in a newspaper and you go out and assault someone. But we have to have a conversation about the fact that we're living in societies with enormously high rates of rape and sexual violence, and that within that context, it's not helpful if we send these messages every day that women are objects, that women are there for men to do as they want with them, that that has an impact on the way that we think about women, and the same ideas and attitudes about women that perhaps are at the root of the more serious abuses. And I think it's so important that we speak out about that, that if we can find a way to do it that involves persuasion and campaigning and speaking out rather than censorship, then that would be my way forward, I think.